The only thing worse than being buried is being buried alive.
Just hold on.
A skier is buried alive under the snow.
Always been curious what it's going to be like after you die. Gee, looks like I'm going to find out.
A construction worker is crushed under almost half a ton of dirt.
I was just frozen like in concrete.
A diver faces burial in an underwater cave.
I was accepting the fact that I was probably going to die in there.
How does anyone return from a living grave? Science solves the mystery of survival against all odds. In the Cascade Mountains, a blizzard swallows a man.
I had no illusions that any kind of struggle or fighting it was going to break me free. I knew I was packed in that snowbank.
There was no way I knew where he was. And there would be a time when, if I didn't find Dennis, that I'd be facing my own death.
Dennis Eucalyptus and David Moss are Methodist ministers. To them, Lassen Volcano Park in California is a sanctuary.
And I love getting into the wilderness because it is a place of solitude and silence where one's spirit is healed and nurtured.
I bring my life up there and I lay it on the altar of those mountains, and it looks so small.
In winter, you risk your life on this altar. This is avalanche country. January 2000. For 2 days, Dennis and David ski cross-country in clear weather. Then, trouble.
We were agreed that we better get our things together and get off this mountain. This was a pretty bad storm.
As the storm builds, David urges caution.
I thought it might be a good idea if we stopped and considered the idea of building a cave and waiting it out.
I said, we're only about 1.5 miles from where the car is parked. Why don't we just take some precautions and keep our eyes open and go forward?
Dennis ties on an avalanche cord, meant to remain visible if the skier is buried. As David searches for his own cord, Dennis forges on.
And he was starting to disappear into the whiteness of the blizzard.
Further up the mountain, disaster.
There was snow flowing from my right to my left across my skis and across my ankles. And I turned back into the blizzard and I yelled, "Avalanche."
And I thought I heard him say, "Advance."
Just then another wave came across my upper body and my shoulders. And I thought, uh-oh.
Dennis is buried 2 meters under, upright, his right arm raised, helpless.
You cannot move your legs, you cannot move your arms, you can't move anything. And I felt like there were 1,000 hands holding me tight.
The wind is so loud, David hears nothing, and he sees no sign of Dennis.
I was looking at the tracks and they disappeared. They disappeared in a rubble of white snow.
Dennis's avalanche cord is nowhere in sight.
Dennis was underneath me somewhere, just feet under me somewhere. He was gonna die if I didn't find him.
I thought, I wonder if David got caught in the avalanche as well. And if he did, they wouldn't find our bodies to spring.
We have these whistles for emergencies, so hopefully he could hear that through the howl of the storm.
It was extremely quiet. It was twilight in that snow, and I started thanking God for being with me there.
He has a small but vital pocket of air, yet the weight of the snow makes breathing hard.
I could only take like a half breath, and so I began to do this breathing meditation.
On the surface, David's mobile phone is almost dead.
I hoped against hope that it would work, and I called the church.
David gives his location to a Sunday school teacher. Then, his phone dies.
I never felt so utterly alone in my life. I started digging straight into the side of the avalanche field, and I knew whatever I did in the next few minutes would either save him or he would die. It was all up to me.
Between the remote location and the bad weather, help is hours away. Within half an hour, his chances of survival will be low.
I waited and thanked God for being with me in that moment. I knew that I was not alone, and I began to pray for David. I prayed for my wife, Cindy.
Then Dennis blacks out.
My last thought that I can recall was, I wonder what happens next. What happens when you die? And I was thinking, gee, it looks like I'm going to find out.
I refused to think about the possibility that he would be dead. I knew that he probably was, but then I couldn't stop.
David is losing body heat and becoming dehydrated.
I was running out of water. There was no time to do anything like melt snow with my stove. I just gotta keep digging.
He starts to hallucinate. He faces death from hypothermia or another avalanche.
There were moments of sheer panic when I would feel a rumble and a shaking and think that it was coming down on top of me.
"6 hours after the avalanche, salvation for David.
It was such a joy to see them. This incredible joy that they're there.
Rescuers hold no hope for Dennis.
And I realized that I had forgotten to bring a body bag with me. And I was kind of kicking myself for that.
Should they try to recover his body in the storm, or wait?
I kind of had two things going in my mind at the time. One was the place had already avalanched, and if we came back the next day, chances of being caught in another avalanche were pretty high. Secondarily, it was just too hard to work to get there to turn around and go back down.
They start looking.
And within probably 1 to 3 minutes, we were able to hit what we assumed to be was Dennis's body. We went ahead and got our shovels out and started digging a small trench just down to where Dennis was. Over the storm, I could hear different sound come up. I couldn't identify it at first, and then I think it hit us that this was Dennis breathing. The realization that he was still alive hit us really hard.
I was rejoicing that he'd beaten the odds, but then there was a second thought, well, maybe his brain is gone. Maybe he won't never be Dennis again.
Every once in a while, you would hear him moan. I believe he still thought he was under the snow and he was digging himself out.
Halfway to the hospital, Dennis comes to.
Am I still alive? Those were my first words. Am I still alive? I didn't expect to wake up in this world.
Then, a more worldly question.
wanted to know who won the Super Bowl. And we just kind of all looked at each other and thought, okay, this guy's with it.
In the ER, doctors are amazed by his condition.
By the time I examined him, he was alert. I didn't find much of anything wrong with him, aside from the fact that he was shivering like crazy. And it took about an hour and a half to 2 hours for that to stop.
Dennis is treated for severe hypothermia and released after just 12 hours.
What happened to me was just an utter miracle. Not only the fact that I was buried in an avalanche for 6 hours, I came out without even frostbite.
Dennis's miraculous escape from his wintry grave is a mystery only science can solve. Dennis Eucalyptus is trapped in a blizzard and buried by an avalanche. Few people have survived under snow for 6 hours. Science probes why Dennis is still alive. An avalanche begins when new snow fails to bond with the layer beneath. The extra weight on a steep slope can cause a slab to break loose. Few victims survive more than 2 hours. Many perish on impact with rocks or trees. But Dennis is in the clear, the first key to his survival. The second key? Quick thinking as the avalanche rolls over.
I stuck an arm up out of the snow so somebody could find me. I closed my mouth. A lot of people die just by breathing snow in. I struggled to keep the snow out of my face and make a little space right in front of me.
Within half an hour, 2/3 of avalanche victims die of asphyxiation. But Dennis creates an air pocket big enough to sustain the oxygen level in his blood. He also keeps his head. When the brain senses danger, it floods the bloodstream with adrenaline, causing hyperventilation. If the air supply is already limited, oxygen levels plunge and carbon dioxide rises. With prayer, Dennis suppresses his panic, slows his breathing, and conserves his oxygen. The third key to his survival. Yet the weight on a victim can be deadly. A cubic meter of wet snow can weigh almost a ton. With so much weight, a victim can't expand his chest. But the snow over Dennis is dry, only around 100 kilograms per cubic meter, the fourth key to his survival. Dennis won't suffocate, but he does face death by hypothermia. Extreme cold causes the metabolism to slow down. Less blood flows to the brain and vital organs. When the body temperature reaches around 30 degrees Celsius, the heart and lungs fail. The fourth key to Dennis's survival, retaining body heat. The wind chill drives temperatures on the surface below freezing. But the snow insulates Dennis and keeps the temperature around him near zero. Of all the body heat Dennis loses, more than 55% is lost through his exposed head. But the air pocket acts like an igloo, retaining the lost heat and raising the temperature. As his body cools, blood retreats towards the core to protect vital organs. For once, fat is an ally. It's a good insulator and helps to keep blood warm. His body temperature falls to 28 degrees Celsius. He's hypothermic, but warm enough to keep vital organs working. The final key, luck. A few centimeters either way, and rescuers would have missed Dennis.
The only way I was found was that a member of the search and rescue was probing for my body, thinking I was dead. But since they were up there and were getting David off the mountain, they were going to look for me for a few minutes. And within a minute or two, he stuck the probe down, which was a 6-foot probe, all the way down to his fists. And he hit the tips of my fingertips that were up over my head. Everything else was lower than any of his probes. The only thing he could have touched with a probe was my fingertips. He hit those within a minute of looking.
Dennis adds one more key.
Every time you practice trusting in the smallest of things in our daily life, that's like putting a little faith in the faith bank. And you relax and you allow a miracle to happen.
December 1998. A crew is laying a sewer line on Highway 58 outside Chattanooga. Darby Patrick stands 4.5 meters down at the end of the pipe.
We just came back from lunch and just started digging out the trench. And that's when the trench caved in on me.
500 kilograms of dirt.
Couldn't move a muscle. I mean, you was just frozen like in concrete. I was scared to death there. I didn't think it was no chance at all. I mean, I thought I was a goner.
His hard hat rests just in front of his face, providing a tiny pocket of air.
Well, I tried to slow down my breathing and tried to relax, but it was real hard. I knew within maybe 5 minutes, I'd probably be dead.
Danny Haig is among the first on the scene.
We went to the closest manhole and dropped a ventilation hose down inside the pipe, hoping in some way it would apply some fresh air to Darby.
Darby lies only 30 centimeters from the end of the pipe they're laying. But in between stands a wall of dirt.
My hand was up just a little bit, and I was trying to dig a little hole there.
He breaks through to fresh air from the ventilation tube.
Darby!
One of the firefighters said, "Let's holler, see if we hear anything." So they started hollering Darby's name, trying to see if they could get any kind of response.
Help!
That's when I started yelling for help in.
Help!
Help, help, please help me. That's why I was hollering, just help.
Can anybody hear me?
When we heard response from him, it got the adrenaline going and we started working a little more intently.
Help!
Darby's wife gets the news.
It was just the longest drive, quiet, and just crying on and off. But once I'd come around that curve and seen all those emergency vehicles and people, I just lost it.
Now, the race to save Darby hits a snag.
While we were digging, we did notice some additional dirt coming off the sides. We were worried about a large secondary collapse coming down on top of us.
Rescuers are trapped in a dilemma. All that supports the trench is the very dirt they're digging out. To prevent another cave-in, the crew calls in a team of specialists to buttress the trench. The work is vital, but it slows down the rescue. As they get closer, rescuers switch from shovels to a vacuum to avoid injuring Darby. After 4 hours, they reach him.
Once we got Darby's head and arm exposed, my job changed from being one of the rescuers to being one of the medical care providers as a paramedic, sustain him as long as we could.
Danny crawls along the sewer pipe to reach Darby.
I had to get down on the floor of the trench and lay down with him face to face, just a matter of inches away from him, talking to him, trying to assess his neurological status, but also just to provide him some comfort.
Buddy, I'll be out here before you know it, eh? gonna take a while to get you up, man, but we're gonna get you out. All right? Yeah.
He really made a difference in the rescue. Kind of there to calm me down a little bit and start talking about other stuff besides the accident.
I was holding his hand, talking to him. We were talking about his wife and his family.
Just hang in there, all right? That's cool.
Talking about anything I could think of to keep his mind off the situation he was in.
My legs, my hips was really hurting. It was just really like a bad burning feeling from the waist down.
Minutes after rescuers break through, Darby gets medical attention.
When I got there, I was very surprised that he was actually alive.
I'm gonna fix you right. You'll be fine, buddy.
We asked him how he was doing, and he said he was doing fine. He wanted to know how we were doing. He still was keeping some good spirits about him.
Unbeknown to Darby, lethal fluid is building up in his damaged body. The only way to neutralize it is to get an IV into him.
Was having to go across his body, which was still covered up with dirt, with an IV, come back toward myself with the IV to put it in, and do it at arm's length in the dark, confined space. It was probably the hardest IV I've ever put in.
Okay, keep holding that up there. Okay, that's it.
Then morphine to ease his pain.
And then it was kind of blurry after that.
The digging moves centimetre by centimetre, slowed by the need to buttress the trench. As the temperature falls, Darby becomes hypothermic. Rescuers give him a mask that carries warm air.
In a rescue like this, everything has to be exactly right. One little detail that's overlooked could make the difference between life and death.
One detail, the warm air causes water vapor to form in the mask. Darby starts to choke.
So periodically we actually had to pry the mask up enough to where some of that water would come out, just to keep him from drowning.
Once more on the surface, firefighter Danny Haig summons Darby's wife.
He asked if there was anything I wanted to say to Darby. I just wanted to tell him I love him. That way, if something happened, at least he knew that I loved him.
By 4:30 the next morning, rescuers uncover Darby down to his knees. After 16 hours underground, he's free.
I remember when they put me on a stretcher and pulled me up, and I can remember people's clapping and hollering.
Such a relief that he was just still living, talking and everything like that. I mean, never imagined that things would turn for the worst.
I was thinking I was just going to go to the hospital, get checked out, and go home.
But Darby's injuries are so serious, he's airlifted to Erlanger Hospital.
There's great elation at the site by the rescue team and the trench rescue team and all people involved there. But in our thought process back in the world of critical care, as we know that the fight was now about to begin. He had so many things stacked up against him, his probability of survival was very low.
The threat to his life now shifts. Not crushed from above, but poisoned from inside. Darby Patrick was buried alive for 16 hours in a 4.5-meter trench. Science reveals how he survived. Most victims of these kind of cave-ins suffocate instantly. Darby keeps breathing thanks to a fluke.
My hard hat kind of came off a little bit, and on top of my head, and I had a little air pocket breathing from my hard hat.
The crucial oxygen will last less than 10 minutes. That's just enough time for him to claw an opening to the newly laid sewer pipe, the first key to his survival.
I figure if I'm still breathing, I may have a chance to get out of there.
All around, Darby's body is compressed by thousands of kilograms of dirt.
Wherever the weight of the earth is on the body. The blood supply to that part of the body is essentially cut off.
Blood carries oxygen. Without oxygen, Darby's muscles produce lactic acid. Then the muscles start to die, releasing potassium. The weight of the dirt traps the acid and potassium inside his tissues. A lethal dose of poison builds up in his body.
When you remove that weight, that blood is teeming with acid and toxins, and that can cause instant death.
Simply put, the rescue itself could kill him. San Francisco, 1989. A major earthquake hits the city, collapsing an elevated freeway and killing 41 people.
There were several people who were buried under the double-decker highway that had survived and were alive until they removed the weight, and then they died.
Doctors have a name for this killer: crush syndrome. They also know how to treat it, the second key to Darby's survival.
I was in residency during the San Francisco collapse, and I learned quite a bit about crush injury at that time. If I caused you a extreme crush injury and then, as in the San Francisco collapse, hook a crane to a big piece of concrete and suddenly lift it off of you, all of that blood goes rushing back, and most of those people died instantly when the weight was removed.
It's essential that medication begins while he's still buried. He's given a solution of bicarbonate of soda to neutralize the lactic acid buildup. But as he's uncovered, more acid and potassium enter his system. To flush the toxins, he's also given a diuretic to make him urinate frequently.
We were making him go to the bathroom in the trench, keeping his kidneys flushed and bringing down the acid level in his blood.
When Darby is finally free and the pressure removed, the rescue reaches the most critical stage.
Once we got him out, it was kind of like a house of cards. You know, it's there, it looks great, but it doesn't take much for the whole thing to fall apart.
As blood flow resumes, the circulating toxins weaken Darby's heart. Fluid builds up in his lungs. Oxygen can't get into his blood system. He's rushed to hospital.
What we realize is now, when he arrives, that there's no way to completely stop all of the breakdown products of crush injury and eliminate it with the treatments that we gave him in the field. Those are now circulating now that he's out, and they're doing their damage to the kidney, to the lungs, to the heart, and basically to all of the cellular mechanisms in his body.
A tube is inserted into his windpipe to force oxygen into his lungs at high pressure in order to keep him alive. But the cave-in has done irreversible damage to the body parts trapped the longest.
And what he didn't realize is that that side of his body, basically from the hip down, was no longer alive. Not enough blood supply, not enough oxygen, injury to where most of the muscle tissue was beyond the point of return.
The dying muscles release toxins into his bloodstream. His kidneys clog up and stop filtering the blood. More poison spreads throughout his body, threatening his heart. Doctors perform 70 surgeries. In stages, they remove dead muscle from his legs and arm. They lose the battle to save his left leg. In all, 3 months of surgery, the third key to Darby's survival.
This was a surgical and critical care marathon. But finally we got to the point where we got him through the multiple organ failure and Darby began to wake up.
3 months later, I kind of woke up from the hospital and I had all these tubes in me and IVs, and it was kind of about being in the trench again. That's when I was told I amputated my leg.
The true hero in this is Darby and the human spirit. his absolute will to survive. His words were always, "I'm going to get through this. I will walk again."
He's doing things that I could never imagine. Motorcycle riding, dancing, took me dancing, worked on his own vehicles. I'm married to a strong guy. There's no such thing as no in our household. It don't matter what you say, he's going to do it one way or the other. No matter what. I mean, he's a remarkable man.
Nickajack Reservoir, a man-made lake on the Tennessee River. When the river was dammed 40 years ago, it flooded Nickajack Cave. The entrance is home to thousands of bats. Catfish grow huge on their droppings.
Seen the biggest catfish I'd ever seen in my life, as long as I was.
August 1992. Spear fishermen David Gant and Scott Clark returned to Nickajack to get the one that got away.
We was going back looking for the big fish. We just couldn't find him that night.
No wonder. The cave is a labyrinth. After an hour, they call it quits.
As we was ascending, my hand touched rock, and we shined our lights up there, and it was a solid rock roof. We knew there was underwater caverns there, but we kind of thought we knew where they was.
Somewhere, they made a wrong turn.
At that point, we panicked, and we started swimming together, and of course started breathing fast. I motioned to Scott that I was going to go find our way out, and I left Scott on the bottom looking at his compass. I looked up on top, I came back down to him, and he was gone. There I was, suddenly by myself, didn't have any idea which direction to go. Just breathing uncontrollably fast, scared to death.
David is now hopelessly lost. He's deep inside the cave and running low on air.
I was thinking to myself, what was it going to be like to take that last breath of air and pull in that first mouthful of water? What was it going to be like to drown?
Scott finds the entrance just as he runs out of air. When he gets to dry land, he calls 911. David is still lost. After 20 minutes, he emerges in a small cavern.
I was just very, very happy that I found an air pocket. I mean, I was really happy I found an air pocket.
It's now midnight. David has no way of knowing whether Scott has managed to raise the alarm. He can't rely on a rescue.
I tried to leave that air pocket and make some short circles, you know, hoping that I could find my way back, but it was all in vain.
At 4 in the morning, a police dive team enters the cave. They believe David's air must be exhausted. They're looking for a corpse.
I knew that somebody was in there looking for me, and that gave me great hope. I remember pulling out my dive knife and pulling my hand behind my back and tapping my tank, because you can hear a lot further underwater. So I started tapping on my tank, you know, real hard. It's a wonder I didn't bust a hole in my tank. I tapped on it so much that night. But they never did get close enough to me I could see their lights, or that I could really tell that they was getting close. It was all in the distance.
The divers dare go no further. For a systematic search, they need a map. They contact veteran cavers Dennis Curry and Buddy Lane. The map shows air pockets in the cave.
This still gave us hope immediately that David could be found alive in there.
My philosophy is until someone or that we're looking for is cold, dead, and stiff in front of me, they're still potentially alive. And we're going to do what we can to recover those people.
It's been 12 hours. David is running out of air and hope.
I was probably going to die in there, and I broke down. I started crying. I was thinking to myself how stupid I was to get myself in that position. I was thinking about my kids, my wife that I was leaving behind.
The dive team has also given up hope of finding David, dead or alive. But not Curry and Lane.
I just knew if I was in that situation, I'd want a real sense of urgency. I'd want somebody thinking out of the box to get my sorry butt out of that cave.
Emergency Services Coordinator Mark Caldwell is doing just that. He has the final say on whether it's a rescue or a recovery.
The problem I've got is that I'm getting conflicting information from two very capable rescue units. I'm being told by the dive team and the incident commander on the scene that Gant is deceased. The information I'm getting from Dennis Curry and Buddy Lane is that there's a chance that Gant is still alive. It's a remote chance, but it's a chance. From my standpoint, I'm always going to err on the side of life.
He decides it's a rescue.
The only thing I could come up with, which we had never done before, which was to drop the entire lake system so that it would drop enough to get some fresh air into Gant, number one, and drop enough to get Curry and Lane back into the cave system.
Nickajack Dam was completed in 1967. It's 25 meters high and stretches almost 1.2 kilometers across the Tennessee River. To lower the lake by 2.5 centimeters, they have to lose around 1 billion liters of water. TVA, the power company, are sympathetic, and in minutes, Caldwell's request is carried out. After 13 hours, the oxygen in the air pocket is nearly gone. David is close to suffocating. David Gant is trapped deep inside Nickajack Cave and is close to suffocating. The only way of getting fresh air to him is to drop the level of the entire lake system.
Water level in the air pocket started going down. It was so gradual, it didn't really occur to me until my hand was way up that the water level was going down.
But not fast enough. And there's a limit to how much the lake can be lowered.
They had the ability to drop it about 14 inches. Anything under 14 inches was going to affect navigation on the river system, so they couldn't drop more than 14 inches.
36 centimeters. David is still struggling to breathe.
The air was getting thin in there, and all of a sudden I started hearing a noise. It sounded as loud as a train, and it was air coming across the roof of the cave, through the water. It was the freshest air you ever breathed in your life. It was so cool.
We could hear the banging more often, and it was getting louder. And then eventually we got real close and we hollered and we heard David answer.
I could see their lights. It was kind of a golden glimmer across the water, their lights was. And the first thing I asked them was if they was angels coming for me.
I was so surprised by that, I said, dude, we get called a lot of things, but angel's not usually one of them.
Everyone gave up on David, even David himself, but not his guardian angels. After 17 hours, his ordeal is over.
Everybody started hollering, he's alive, he's alive. I have 3 daughters. They was there, and my wife was there. And it was some more kind of reunion. You know, it was some more kind of reunion. What a feeling.
I've been doing this a very long time. I've only seen a handful of men I knew were facing certain death. And I can tell you a lot of things came together for David Gaunt to be able to survive and make it to daylight.
The margin between life and death can be too close to measure. For David Gaunt, it was exactly 4 centimeters.
This whole thing was just providential because so many things had already come together to work in his favor.
Science reconstructs how David survives. The moment he and Scott realize they're lost, they panic. The hyperventilation caused by fear uses air at up to 16 times the normal rate. Hyperventilation also forces him to exhale large quantities of carbon dioxide. His body can't get enough oxygen to his cells. He senses he's short of air and breathes in even more oxygen, rapidly depleting his air tank. Once he's alone, David manages to suppress his panic, bringing his hyperventilation under control, the first key to his survival.
I would try to stretch my air out. I actually held my breath.
This buys him precious time to find an air pocket. Now he faces a new threat. At 23 degrees Celsius, the water is cold enough for hypothermia. Cold water is more dangerous than cold air. Densely packed water molecules conduct heat from the body 25 times faster than air. The second key to David's survival, conserving heat. His greatest asset is his wetsuit.
I had the wetsuit on, and I didn't really get cold. The wetsuit fills it up with water, and your body temperature warms the water.
He's still losing heat through his arms and feet, but thanks to his buoyancy vest, he doesn't use up valuable energy treading water.
I inflated my BCD, and I was just floating with my vest. My head was probably 7-8 inches from the roof of the cave.
The gravest threat is lack of oxygen. Lowering the lake is the key reason he survives, but it almost kills him. As the water recedes, the air pocket expands, but the lake hasn't yet dropped enough for fresh air to enter the pocket. The concentration of what little oxygen remains is reduced, making breathing even harder.
I started getting hot, kind of nauseated. The air was getting thin in there.
He breathes out carbon dioxide. When the concentration in the air pocket reaches 1%, his body can't clear the excess from his blood. He shows symptoms of carbon dioxide poisoning.
As he's floating there, he's used what air's left in his scuba tank, and now the air that he's breathing is bad. It's all full of carbon dioxide from him breathing it up. So he's actually starting to black out.
The water level has dropped by 30 centimeters.
The first 12 inches of river drop had no effect on Gaunt's circumstances at all. It was the last inch and a half of water drop, which was all TVA could provide us. It was that last inch and a half that actually opened a fresh air passage into Gaunt.
As fresh air rushes in, the oxygen level rises and carbon dioxide falls.
Had the lake not been lowered, Cave divers would have gone into the cave later on and found him floating in that air pocket, and he would have been dead.
By the time rescuers reach David, the oxygen level in his blood has almost returned to normal. He can actually swim to meet them.
I remember everybody getting real quiet. There wasn't nobody saying anything. And just as we got to the boat, I turned around and looked up at the rescuers up there, and it scared them. You know, they thought I was dead. They thought they was just pulling the body out.
When Dennis Curry called me and said they'd walked out with Gant, I was moved to tears.
The only side effect to hit David was in his wallet.
I was charged $3,750 for trespassing, but I was really, really pleased to pay that fine.
What do you mean? You gotta concentrate.
Bitterness doesn't follow the men who stepped out of their own graves.
Get it in and break it in when you can, okay?
They emerged at peace with themselves and defiant of death.
It's one of the few places that I know I can always go to and always reconnect.
I had to go back to the job site and just see if I still could do it. If I can do that, I can do anything.
David Gant is the most defiant of all. He's building his dream house high on a hill overlooking Nickajack Cave.